That will be established after the passing of this bill.
Honourable Leanne Dalziel.
Mr Chairman, I want to respond to a number of the issues that the Minister has raised. First of all, I want to remind him that the legislation that was introduced by the Labor government in 2008, the Sale and Supply of Liquor and Liquor Enforcement Bill, was a baseline bill. So it was the bill that contained the baseline for the changes that we were going to implement to be supplemented for a substantial root and branch exercise actually to be done by the Law Commission at the same time. And in fact, I announced the Law Commission review, the referral to the Law Commission that my colleague Annette King was responsible for as the Minister of Justice on the same day that I lodged that bill. So that bill and the Law Commission report were hand in hand, and it was designed for the urgent stuff to be got on with, and one of the urgent things that was to be got on with was the introduction of local alcohol plans to give local communities an opportunity to have a say about what was happening in their own neighbourhoods. And that was a direct response to the demands from communities from throughout New Zealand who were sick and tired of so many licences being issued regardless of the situation that they were in. So I think it's a bit unfair to describe this bill as something that had just been replaced by the government as something that governments always do. This bill was designed to be introduced as baseline legislation. In fact, the national government had the first reading after its 100 days of action were up, and they referred it to a select committee. They didn't tell all of the people that submitted on that bill that their submission was going to be a complete and utter waste of time because they were going to discharge the bill once it was reported back to the House. And I actually don't believe that the government intended to do that until after they got the Law Commission report, because there were two things that the Minister didn't point out. One was that we required the Law Commission to write a bill. We always said to the Law Commission, we want you to come back not only with the evidence that we need to make real law in this area and respond to the real issues, we want you to come back with a bill, and we will introduce that bill to Parliament, and we will let the evidence speak for itself, and then we will have submissions on the bill that the Law Commission wrote. And we had committed to that, and what did National do when they became government? They thought, well, we'll just truncate the time that they have for reporting back, and that means they won't have time to write that bill. And when the government actually saw what the Law Commission had recommended in its substantial report, Alcohol in Our Lives, Curbing the Harm, Mr Chairman, I believe that the problem that arose at that point for the government was that they didn't want a bar of many of the recommendations to be going before the House. And so what they did was that they made sure that a number of the amendments would be outside the scope of the bill, and they also made sure that the bill that we had introduced would have no further truck at all. And so they discharged the bill in December 2010, just after introducing this bill on the 11th of November 2010. We're referring it to the Select Committee on that date. So in November, the government introduced its own bill to replace a bill that was coming back from Select Committee after having heard all of the submissions, after having put all of their effort into it, and no, it wasn't going to be. They had simply decided that it was going to be discharged. So I think that the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth is something that ought to be spoken of in this regard, and I believe that there has been really an unfair representation of how we've got to the situation that we're in today. And to criticise my colleague on his views on the conscience issue, when we honestly believe that the government was committed to introducing a second bill, not to replace the bill that all of the submissions had been heard of, but a second bill that didn't contain the major recommendations of the Law Commission, well, I think that that's not an accurate reflection of the position that we have ever had on it. I was the first person that raised the question of Mr Chairman, of the conscience vote disappearing, and I believe that we should ultimately have the position where we are able to take principled positions on legislation based on the evidence. I really like evidence-based policies in these areas, but sometimes these are really hard issues. And the reason I raised the conscience vote in 2008 is because it was an election year, and people don't have the courage to face up to some of these really hard issues in election year. And I'm not going to comment on the why for. It's simply a matter of fact that we cannot get real change in these fundamental areas in an election year for that reason. Mr Chairman, I want to talk about the advertising, sponsorship and promotion of alcohol in the context of Chapter 19 of the substantial report of the Law Commission. And I want to remind the House that the Law Commission, when it had put out its original issues paper, they had taken the view that the existing system of self-regulation was generally sufficient, and they said they proposed leaving the bulk of alcohol advertising regulation to the Advertising Standards Authority. Now, I remember when that change was made, and I remember who was in government when that change was made, because I was here and I saw the unfortunate correlation of two portfolios in one person, and that was the Minister of Broadcasting was the Associate Minister of Health, and that was the Honourable Maurice Williamson, who unfortunately I think was enamoured of some of the advertising that he'd seen in Australia, which apparently was very funny advertising, very humorous, and he felt that there was a real it wasn't fair that in New Zealand that those that were promoting these products weren't able to advertise these products in such a cheerful and positive way. And so the law was changed to remove it from the broadcasting standards area into the Advertising Standards Authority, an industry-based body with the responsibility for regulating brand advertising. Mr Chairman, the Law Commission listened to the submissions, and I think this House should just realise what they're doing in voting against these supplementary order papers. Almost every submitter had something to say about advertising and sponsorship. 2,281 out of 2,939 submissions commented on the policy options about advertising and marketing. Of the 2,281 submissions, 86% supported banning or restricting all advertising of all alcohol in all media. That's how the people feel about it. That's how people want us to respond as a parliament. And the reason that it is hard for us to respond to this issue is because of who pays for the advertising, who benefits from the payment of the advertising, and what other elements that might affect the work that we do in this parliament have to do with that. i.e. the media have a lot of influence in terms of public opinion over politicians and politics generally, and obviously they stand to benefit from the advertising dollar. There is a multiple layer of effect that actually prevents this House doing the courageous thing, which in this case is the right thing, which is to find a way of reducing the amount of alcohol advertising in our country. The Law Commission said do it over a period of time and that will be okay, and these supplementary order papers that are before the House also say let's do it over a period of time. I have made submissions to the to the Advertising Standards Authority on the alcohol code of practice over the years since I've been in politics. Obviously not when I was a minister, as I didn't have a relevant portfolio, but when I was an MP in the early 1990s, I submitted twice to that body. On both occasions, I supported a complete prohibition on the television advertising, broadcast advertising of alcohol, and often the point was made, but that's freedom of speech. It comes under the Bill of Rights Act. We've got the freedom to speak on these matters. And my argument was that sometimes it's better not to have things promoted in a way that undermines a health promotion message. Mr. Chairman, there is a Mr. Chairman.
Honourable Annette King.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sure my colleague, who has just resumed her